People don't destroy their lives overnight. They just smile at the wrong thing. Once. Most men walk through life fearing the wrong threat. They think danger comes in the form of a seductive single woman, bold, flirtatious, and unattached. But they're blind to the real risk, because the truth is far more uncomfortable. Married women are often the easiest to fall. And no, it's not because they're immoral. It's not because they're weak. It's because they're starving for something they used to feel and lost. You see the ring on her finger and assume she's fulfilled. You see her husband and kids and think she's safe. But what you don't see is the slow erosion beneath the surface. A woman doesn't betray her vows in a single act. It happens in moments. A glance that lingers too long. A message that feels just a little too exciting. A conversation where she feels seen again. That's where it begins. Not in the bedroom, not in some hotel room, but in the quiet tension between routine and desire. And here's the part that most men miss. She's not looking to cheat. She's looking to feel alive. And that need, if unacknowledged, can lead her straight to another man's arms. This video is not about blaming women. It's about understanding the psychological truth of how emotional needs, unmet and unspoken, become ticking time bombs. Because if you don't see it clearly, you'll either become her escape or her victim. So pay attention. In this video, we're going to break down why married women become the most vulnerable prey, the hidden emotional triggers that lead them to cross boundaries they once swore never to touch, and most importantly, how a Stoic man, calm, grounded, and rational, sees through the illusion and refuses to be seduced or destroyed by it. This is not just a warning, it's a blueprint for clarity. Because in a world full of emotional chaos, the Stoic man is the one who remains unshakable. Let's begin. She's not looking for a man. She's looking for a version of herself she no longer recognizes. At the beginning of most marriages, love feels like fire. The connection is electric. The nights are filled with deep conversations. The glances, the inside jokes, the spontaneous affection. Everything feels alive. She feels chosen, desired, seen. But then, slowly and quietly, routine begins its slow, relentless attack. The passion becomes predictable, the conversations become logistical, and the intimacy, it turns into maintenance. At first, she shrugs it off. This is normal, she tells herself. Marriage is work. And it is. But emotional starvation doesn't feel normal. It feels invisible. She starts to fade, not to the outside world, but in her own eyes. Not because she's shallow or needy or ungrateful, but because women, by nature, are wired for connection. Deep, emotional, soul-level connection. And when that connection dies, something inside her does too. Here's the harsh truth most men don't understand. She doesn't miss the sex. She misses being wanted. She misses feeling seen without having to scream for attention. She misses the thrill of being admired, not just appreciated. You see, a lot of men confuse provision with presence. They think that paying the bills, taking care of logistics, showing up physically is enough. But to a woman who once felt like a queen in your eyes, the absence of emotional intimacy feels like exile. So what happens next? Something seemingly innocent. A stranger compliments her. A coworker listens, really listens. A man at the gym makes her laugh in a way her husband hasn't in years. And suddenly, her heart flinches. She doesn't act on it. She probably doesn't even admit it. But something inside wakes up, a whisper from the past. This is what it used to feel like. It's not lust. It's not infidelity. It's a hunger to feel alive again. This is the invisible void, the silent emotional vacuum that builds over months, even years. It doesn't show up in arguments. It doesn't scream for attention. It quietly erodes the foundation from the inside out. And if you're not paying attention, you'll never see it coming. Because everything still looks fine on the surface. She still smiles in family photos. She still packs the kids' lunches. She still wears the ring. But emotionally, she's somewhere else. Now here's where it gets dangerous, and where a Stoic man must sharpen his awareness. When a woman stops feeling seen by her husband, she doesn't always leave. Instead, her subconscious starts searching for validation elsewhere, not deliberately, not maliciously, but gradually and naturally, like water seeking an open crack in stone. And all it takes is one man, just one, who makes her feel like more than just a wife, a mom, a caretaker. Someone who looks at her not for what she does, but for who she is. Or more accurately, who she used to be. This is what modern psychology refers to as social identity loss. It happens when a woman's sense of self becomes completely consumed by her roles. Before marriage, she was her own person. She had dreams, passions. She was mysterious, magnetic, alive. After marriage, she becomes a role. Someone's wife, someone's mother. The emotional glue that keeps the household together. And while those roles are noble, even sacred, they can also feel suffocating if not balanced with personal identity. When she no longer feels like her own person, she starts craving moments that remind her she's still her. And sometimes, those moments come from another man. This isn't about morality. It's about emotional survival. When a woman feels invisible for too long, attention becomes oxygen. Even the smallest gesture, a look, a kind word, a moment of genuine interest, can feel intoxicating. Not because of the man, himself, but because of the version of herself he reflects back at her. That version. The one who was playful, the one who was desired, the one who didn't just exist to serve others. That's what she's chasing. Not love, not betrayal, but a mirror of who she used to be. And here's where most men fail. They don't see the emotional drift until it's too late, until she's already attached elsewhere, mentally, emotionally, and eventually, physically. But you, if you're here watching this, you're not like most men. You're building awareness, strength, vision, the kind of clarity a Stoic man needs to read the signs before they become regrets. Because what starts in silence never stays there. And the man who sees early is the man who never loses what he values most. No one wakes up and says, "Today, I'll betray everything I've built." That's not how it works. It starts silently, in the mind. Not with a choice, but with a feeling. The subtle return of something she thought had vanished long ago. She tells herself it's harmless, just a message, just a compliment, just a smile. But in those small moments, a quiet shift takes place. The heart leans in. The mind follows. And suddenly, she finds herself defending what just weeks ago would have felt unthinkable. The process doesn't begin with betrayal. It begins with permission, internal, private, unspoken. Permission to feel alive again. Permission to enjoy the warmth of being seen. And that's where the psychological trap begins. At first, it feels innocent. He's just being nice. She's just being polite. They're just talking. But the brain doesn't register neutrality. It registers stimulation. She starts to smile more at his texts than her husband's touch. She begins waiting for his voice, not her husband's attention. And when desire awakens, guilt arrives right behind it. That's when the mind steps in to do what it does best: justify. The human mind hates discomfort. It cannot sit with contradiction. So when a woman feels the pull of another man but still believes she's loyal, her brain has to create a bridge between what she feels and what she thinks she believes. That's called cognitive dissonance, and it is the birthplace of self-deception. She doesn't say, "I'm crossing a line." She says, "It's just talking." She doesn't admit, This is emotional attachment. She says, "I'm just venting to a friend." She doesn't confess, "I'm drifting away." She convinces herself, "If my husband paid more attention to me, I wouldn't even be here." Little by little, the story shifts. She becomes the victim, not the actor. She's not cheating, she's surviving. She's not dishonest, she's emotionally neglected. Her actions no longer feel like betrayal. They feel like justice, and that's the most dangerous turning point. Once a person believes they're justified, they become unstoppable. The woman who once honored boundaries starts bending them without guilt. At first, it's small things, deleting a message, withholding details, spending more time online. But then the emotional conversations deepen. She shares her stress, her dreams, her loneliness. And she tells herself, "It's not physical, so it's not cheating." But it is, because betrayal isn't just a physical act. Betrayal begins the moment she shares the parts of her soul that were once reserved for her husband. The moment she hides a message. The moment she laughs in a way she hasn't at home in years. The moment she starts living in two emotional worlds, one of routine and one of passion. And here's what most people don't realize. Emotional affairs are more dangerous than physical ones because they're easier to deny, easier to justify, harder to detect, but far more difficult to walk away from. They create intimacy without accountability, desire without risk, until the line eventually gets crossed, and it no longer matters. The reason emotional affairs become addictive is not because of the man involved. It's because of the feeling she rediscovers in his presence. Neuroscience has proven that romantic attention triggers the same dopamine pathways as drug addiction. The pleasure centers in the brain light up when someone new gives us attention, especially after years of emotional drought. So she goes back, not because she loves him, but because she loves the way she feels when she's with him. Desired, interesting, alive. And soon she tells herself, "I'll stop after this last time. Next week I'll end it." But next week never comes, because by then it's not just about him, it's about her need for emotional oxygen. That's why it escalates. That's why it continues. Not because she's evil, not because she planned it, but because she allowed herself to believe the lie her heart whispered. You're not doing anything wrong. And when the lie becomes familiar, the truth feels foreign. She gets better at hiding it, more skilled at playing both roles. She compartmentalizes. One life for the family, one life for the fire. And eventually, even she starts to believe her own story. So where does this leave you? The man on the outside, looking in. You don't fight this with control. You don't chase, argue, or try to fix what she's already emotionally replaced. You stand still. In truth, you observe. You listen to the quiet signs, the delay in response, the sudden emotional distance, the look in her eyes that says she's somewhere else entirely. The Stoic man does not panic. He does not fall into rage. He does not lower himself into chaos. He stands, clear, aware, unshaken. He knows that once someone begins justifying disloyalty, the war has already begun. And if he doesn't hold his ground, he'll be pulled into it. He knows that when a woman starts sharing her mind with someone else, her heart is already halfway gone. And he knows that he cannot save someone who is addicted to the feeling of being someone else's fantasy. That is the trap. Emotional, psychological, invisible to the untrained eye. But not to the Stoic man. He sees it, he understands it, and most importantly, he doesn't play into it. Because while others are deceived by charm, lost in blame, or trapped in cycles of betrayal, he remains clear, rational, grounded. And in a world where emotion controls most, that clarity is the ultimate power. Most people think cheating is about sex, about a hotel room, about physical betrayal. But here's what most never realize until it's too late. The most dangerous affairs don't start in the body. They start in the mind. And once a woman's mind has detached, the body is just catching up. You won't see it at first. There's no lipstick on the collar, no perfume on a shirt. There are only late-night texts that get quickly deleted, subtle shifts in tone, shorter conversations, moments where she's physically present, but emotionally absent. That's emotional infidelity. It's quiet, invisible, and far more destructive than most men want to admit. Because with physical cheating, there's clarity. There's no ambiguity in crossing a sexual line. But emotional betrayal? That lives in the gray. It gives her an escape, a story to tell herself. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just talking to someone who understands me. It's not like I slept with him. But here's the truth. The moment she gives emotional intimacy to another man, she has already stepped outside the marriage. And it doesn't matter if they haven't touched, because the connection, the emotional charge, is now somewhere else. She starts telling him things she no longer tells her husband. She shares her dreams, her frustrations, her feelings. He becomes her emotional confidant, the man she turns to when life gets heavy, the one who validates her, compliments her, gives her the thrill of being pursued again. And while her husband may still be next to her in bed, her heart, her excitement, her presence already belongs to someone else. This is the betrayal most men don't see coming, because they're too focused on the physical, too focused on signs of lust, while ignoring the collapse of emotional loyalty right in front of them. What makes it worse is how easily she rationalizes it, because in her mind, nothing bad has happened. She's just texting, she's just venting, she's just talking to a friend. But that friend knows more about her inner world than her husband. He gets the version of her that's fun, flirty, and interesting. The version her husband hasn't seen in years. And slowly, that emotional tether to her marriage unravels. One conversation at a time. Here's what most people don't talk about. The emotional bond between two people is more powerful than lust. Because emotional connection leads to trust, to openness, to the desire to be vulnerable. And when a woman starts choosing another man to be emotionally vulnerable with over her husband, she is rewriting the foundation of her loyalty. That's why emotional affairs often lead to physical ones. Not immediately, not always intentionally. But over time, the gap between talking and touching becomes dangerously thin. The more emotionally invested she becomes, the less guilty she feels. And the less guilty she feels, the more likely she is to cross that final line. This is why emotional cheating is so lethal. It's harder to detect, easier to deny, and more difficult to stop because it doesn't feel like cheating. It feels like relief. To her, the other man becomes oxygen in a suffocating routine. He reminds her of who she was before the responsibilities, before the exhaustion, before she felt like just someone's wife. And once that happens, walking away from that feeling becomes almost impossible. She'll tell herself, I'll stop after this week. I'll delete the app after this one last conversation. I'll fix my marriage after I figure things out. But weeks turn into months, and by the time she realizes how far she's drifted, it's already too late. Her husband is no longer her partner. He's the man she hides from. And the other man, he's no longer just a friend. He's the one she emotionally belongs to, even if she's never said it aloud. And that's the danger. Emotional betrayal doesn't announce itself. It whispers, it creeps, it rewires her heart from the inside out. So what does the Stoic man do with this knowledge? He stops looking for drama. He stops waiting for the obvious. He learns to read the subtle, the emotional withdrawal, the shift in attention, the misplaced affection. He doesn't accuse. He doesn't beg. He simply sees. And in seeing, he protects his clarity. Because the man who's unaware is the easiest to betray. But the man who's grounded, present, and sharp, He cannot be lied to for long. In a world that teaches men to look for the physical signs of infidelity, the Stoic man goes deeper. He watches where her heart turns, because the real betrayal always happens there first. Most betrayals don't happen with a grand decision. They happen in silence, in moments that feel small, even innocent. A text left unsent, a message deleted, a touch that lingers just half a second too long, and she doesn't pull away. That's how it begins, not with intention, but with impulse, not with action, but with hesitation. And that single hesitation, that moment she chooses not to stop herself, is when the line finally snaps. It's called the breaking point. And by the time she crosses it, the entire story has already been rewritten in her mind. She no longer sees it as betrayal. She sees it as inevitability, or worse, entitlement. I've sacrificed so much. I've been neglected for too long. I deserve to feel this again. This is the point of no return, the moment when emotion overrides morality and logic loses all its power. What makes this point so dangerous is not the action itself, it's how fast everything escalates after it. Because once the first step is taken, every step after feels easier. Psychologists call it threshold theory, the idea that the hardest part of doing something wrong is doing it for the first time. After that, the guilt softens, the resistance fades, the behavior starts to normalize. The first lie is hard, the second feels familiar. By the fifth, it becomes routine. She doesn't feel like she's doing anything wrong anymore. Why? Because the story in her mind has already changed, and once the story changes, everything she does fits within it. Now she's no longer a woman cheating on her husband. She's a woman reclaiming her happiness. She's no longer keeping secrets. She's protecting herself. She's not betraying. She's surviving. This is where the most terrifying shift happens. She becomes emotionally invested in her new life, more than she is in her old one. The marriage becomes the background. The other man becomes the focal point. Her husband, once her anchor, now feels like the stranger. And the new man, the escape, the thrill, now feels like home. It doesn't matter if the affair has turned physical or not, because the emotional bond is already stronger than anything left in her marriage. And the guilt? It's gone, not because she's a bad person, but because the mind has completely adjusted its lens. Now, infidelity is no longer a moral issue. It's a justified rebellion. This is when she starts making bold moves. Meeting up as friends without telling her husband, lying about where she's been, making plans that don't include her family, creating a secret emotional world she doesn't want to leave. And when questioned, she'll defend it fiercely. She'll turn the blame around. You don't trust me. You're paranoid. You're controlling. But underneath those words is a truth she's hiding, from her husband and from herself. She doesn't want to stop, because stopping means going back to the emotional numbness she was escaping from in the first place. Here's the Stoic truth. People don't change their behavior until they believe the cost is higher than the reward. And at this stage, the reward, the thrill, the freedom, the emotional intensity feels too intoxicating to give up, even if it means risking everything. The real danger isn't just that she's cheating. The real danger is that she doesn't want to come back. And this is when most men make their biggest mistake. They beg, they plead, they try to win her back. But by then, the battle isn't external, it's internal. She's no longer weighing you against another man. She's weighing who she used to be against who she feels like now. And when that emotional identity shift happens, logic won't bring her home. A Stoic man knows this. He understands that begging for loyalty is the surest sign that it's already gone. He doesn't chase what is choosing to leave. He doesn't force someone to stay where they no longer feel alive. He simply sees it for what it is and decides with clarity, not desperation. Here's what separates the grounded man from the broken one. The grounded man recognizes the breaking point before she does. He pays attention to the shift in tone, to the lack of presence, to the subtle secrecy, and he doesn't wait for the final betrayal to speak his truth. He addresses the emotional drift early, without fear, without begging. Because he knows that once a woman is emotionally gone, the body soon follows. In a world where men are trained to look for lipstick, he listens for silence. In a culture that tells men to compete harder, he chooses stillness. He knows that if loyalty must be earned through performance, it was never real. So when the breaking point comes, he's not surprised. He's ready, not bitter, not angry, just clear. Because his worth was never dependent on her validation. His identity was never built on her attention. And his peace, non-negotiable. He doesn't lose himself in her confusion. He doesn't drown in her excuses. He lets go, not out of weakness, but out of strength. Because holding on to someone who has emotionally let go is not love, it's fear. And fear has no place in the heart of a Stoic man. So understand this. The breaking point is not the end. It's the revelation. It shows you what was already true. It doesn't destroy a marriage. It exposes what was already dying. And the man who sees it clearly? He doesn't collapse. He doesn't beg for crumbs. He walks forward, silent, certain, unshakable. Because in the face of betrayal, the greatest power a man can hold is clarity. Not every man sees the fall before it happens. Most ignore the warning signs. They dismiss the silence. They rationalize the distance. And by the time they realize something's wrong, she's already gone, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. But a Stoic man is different. He doesn't react. He observes. He studies patterns, not promises. Energy, not excuses. He knows that beneath every shift in behavior is a signal, and the man who chooses not to see it is the man who chooses blindness. When she starts pulling away emotionally, he doesn't panic. He doesn't start performing to win her back, because he understands this truth. You never win someone back. You only prolong the collapse. What does he do instead? He steps back. He watches without illusion. He asks himself, what's changed? Not just on the surface, but at the core. He understands that loyalty isn't loud. It doesn't need to be declared over and over. It shows in presence, consistency, and transparency. And the moment those things disappear, something deeper is shifting. A Stoic man doesn't interrogate her. He doesn't beg her to explain herself. Why? Because he already knows. The truth doesn't hide. Only lies need shadows. Only betrayal requires secrecy. And when secrecy enters the room, trust has already left. But this man, the grounded man, doesn't lose his sense of self. He doesn't let someone else's confusion destroy his internal compass. Because his identity isn't built on her behavior. It's built on his values, his discipline, his clarity. The Stoic man does not crumble in the face of betrayal. He refines. He becomes even sharper, more silent, more powerful. He doesn't need to expose her. He lets time do that. Because what is done in the dark always seeks light, eventually. And when it does, he doesn't say, "I told you so." He doesn't scream. He doesn't curse. He simply stands there, still, solid, untouched by the storm. That's what it means to be Stoic. Not emotionless, but unmoved by chaos, unaffected by drama, committed to truth, even when it hurts. He knows that some women aren't lost. They're running, not from him, but from themselves, from the emptiness they've never faced, from the wounds they never healed. And he understands, you can't save someone who's addicted to their own self-destruction. So he doesn't try to fix her. He doesn't try to pull her back. He simply steps aside and lets the truth unfold. The Stoic man isn't passive. He's intentional. He knows what he will and will not tolerate. He sets boundaries not as ultimatums, but as reflections of his self-respect. He does not chase love that requires him to abandon himself. He does not cling to a relationship that demands blindness. He is not afraid of loss, because he knows that what is not aligned with his values is already a form of loss. And here's the paradox most men never understand. The more grounded you are, the harder you are to lose. But the less willing you are to betray yourself, the easier it is to walk away from anyone who does. He doesn't compete for attention. He doesn't demand proof of love. He doesn't tolerate confusion disguised as affection. He lives by clarity, and that clarity becomes a shield against manipulation, against deception, against emotional chaos. When he feels the shift, he doesn't chase. He reflects. He listens to instinct. And if the energy no longer aligns, he makes peace with the outcome, no matter how painful it may be. Because a Stoic man would rather face heartbreak with dignity than live a lie with comfort. He understands that peace is more valuable than partnership, if the partnership requires him to abandon his center. And that's what separates him from most men. While others spiral in confusion, he rises in consciousness. While others drown in neediness, he swims in solitude. While others scream for closure, he lives in such awareness that the truth becomes clear without needing to be spoken. This is the power of Stoic awareness. It doesn't prevent betrayal, but it ensures that betrayal never destroys you, because when you see the game, you don't get played. When you recognize the pattern, you don't become the victim. And when you choose yourself fully, no one else's choices can break you. In the end, she may leave, she may return, she may apologize, or she may never look back. But none of that changes the man who walks this path, because the Stoic man doesn't measure himself by what he receives. He measures himself by what he refuses to become: desperate, reactive, lost. And that's why he's unshakable. So why are some married women the easiest to fall? Not because they're evil, not because they planned it, but because they're searching for something they've forgotten how to find within themselves and within their home. They don't set out to betray. They set out to feel seen, to feel wanted, to feel alive. And when that feeling doesn't exist in the marriage anymore, they start looking elsewhere, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously. It begins with emotional drift, turns into internal justification, slips into secrecy, and ends in a moment that changes everything. But if there's one truth that runs deeper than all others, it's this: the betrayal doesn't begin with the act. It begins with the story we tell ourselves to allow the act. And by the time the behavior appears, the heart has already turned. So what does a man do in the face of all this? He doesn't try to police her thoughts. He doesn't obsess over her actions. He doesn't become the jailer of her choices. He becomes the guardian of his own clarity. Because in a world where people lie to themselves just to feel good for a moment, the Stoic man tells himself the truth, even if it hurts. He doesn't cling. He doesn't chase. He doesn't crumble. He simply sees what is and chooses his response with power. If she's fading, he notices. If she's shifting, he observes. If she's already gone, he grieves, but he does not lose himself in her departure. Because a Stoic man understands, your peace is more important than her presence. Your awareness is more powerful than her excuses, and your ability to walk away with your dignity intact. That's your greatest strength. This isn't a video about blaming women. This is a wake-up call to every man who's been sleepwalking through his relationships, waiting until the damage is done before he starts paying attention. Because the signs were always there. You just didn't want to see them. Now you do. And that's the shift. From this moment forward, you no longer react from fear. You respond from principle. You no longer beg for love. You command respect through the way you live. You no longer fear the truth. You walk straight into it, because you know that truth is your shield. You are not here to save someone who refuses to be saved. You are not here to be a placeholder in someone else's emotional confusion. You are here to become solid, clear, unshakable. Because in a world of distraction and deception, the man who sees clearly, the man who holds his standard, even when others don't, he's the one who cannot be broken. This is the unshakable Stoic path, and this is the truth most will ignore. But you've seen it now. So don't look away. Stay sharp, stay still, stay grounded, and above all, stay stoic.